historical landmark in the state of Kentucky. Eyewitness News' Amelia Young was at the dedication ceremony that the church held earlier today.
We've known internally that we're a part of history, but now the world will know.
It sits on the corner of Washington and Elm, a church with history dating back to 1840.
Many good times, many sad times that have gone on. But through it all, God has been a blessing to each of us.
It's a place where people have celebrated, cried, laughed, and cheered.
We've endured through lots, being established in 1840, during times of slavery when it was against the law, really, to gather together for African Americans and blacks to gather together and worship.
The African Baptist Church was formed in 1840. In 1866, moved into the location it's in today and changed the name to First Missionary Baptist Church.
It's been a blessing that we've been able to stay and endure and still give God the honor and praise for 179 years.
The congregation already knew they were a part of history, but now it's officially a historical landmark as the church was awarded a marker from Kentucky's Historical Society.
Everyone who will ever come here will always know what place we have in not only in African American history, not only in Kentucky history, but in the history of the United States.
Unveiling the marker was a proud moment for not only the congregation, but the city as well.
We're very proud of that fact, and we want to echo the fact that God has been good to us down through the years.
It's a great feeling. It's a blessing from God.
In Henderson, Amelia Young, Eyewitness News.
85 Tri-State veterans were given the opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. yesterday on the 10th honor flight of Southern Indiana. And only Eyewitness News reporter Amelia Young went along. Veterans departed Evansville just before 7 o'clock yesterday morning. They were welcomed to D.C. by a very large crowd. At the nation's capital, they visited the World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Lincoln, and U.S. Air Force memorials. They also saw the changing of the guard at Arlington National Cemetery. All of the veterans were blown away by how many strangers came up to them, thanking them for their service.
I was so impressed when we got off the airplane and came out into the terminal, and all those, there were hundreds of people lined up on both sides of that aisle waiting to shake our hands and tell us how wonderful it was that we did these things for our country.
And be sure to watch Amelia's special report on the honor flight tomorrow night at 6 o'clock on WEHT Local, and then again at 9 o'clock on Local 7 WTVW. Still ahead this Sunday night on Eyewitness News, a violent weekend in the Northeast after 10 people are shot at a bar in New Jersey. How the community is dealing with that violence when we come back.
Well, lots of showers and thunderstorms in the tri-state earlier today, and look how much rain we picked up at the airport in Evansville, almost an inch, and some of those storms did turn severe. Our high at the airport today was 85 degrees, a little above normal, but still quite a ways from our record high. We have drier, quieter weather on the way for our Memorial Day. I'll let you know how warm it's going to get tomorrow and when our next higher chance of rain returns as the week goes on. That's all in your forecast next on Eyewitness News at 9.
You're watching Local 7 WTVW with Brandon Bartlett, meteorologist Stacey May, and sports with Michael Gilbert. This is Eyewitness News at 9. Download the new updated Eyewitness News, your Weather Authority app from your app store today. Now, from your Weather Authority, meteorologist Stacey May.
Well, late this morning, numerous showers and thunderstorms developed across the tri-state. Everything quiet now, though. The sensitivity still turned up there on live first warning Doppler radar, but all the rain is gone and our severe weather threat is over with. We will stay quiet and dry now as we go through the rest of tonight. And tomorrow, a much quieter and drier day across the tri-state for our Memorial Day. This is what it looks like right now on the east side of Evansville, looking from Deaconess Gateway Hospital with our MCF construction camera. Kind of out over the Lloyd Expressway as it goes over, as I-69, I should say, goes over the Lloyd Expressway. The temperature out there has been on the warm side. We cooled it down with that rain for a while this afternoon, but then after the rain and those storms, the sun came out, and that warmed our temperature back up into the 80s, and we've been just falling back to the 70s now this evening. We're at 73 degrees, and now the wind is calm, and the dew point is up there in the upper 60s, so it's a warm and muggy night. And tomorrow is going to be another very warm, humid day, but once again, we're going to have that breeze. So that helps to kind of move that air around, and that makes it feel a lot better. Temperatures, for the most part, in the 70s. You're hanging on to 80 degrees right now in Madisonville, but everybody else going down through the 70s. But I think we're just going to bottom out in the upper 60s to around 70, it looks like, for an overnight low. Here's a look at Storm Tracker. And you can kind of see how what was left of those showers and storms was pushing to our southeast earlier this evening, continuing to dissipate and push farther away to the east. Just a few clouds now lingering behind. A few spotty showers that we had around continue to fade away too here late this evening. So just a partly cloudy sky for us as we go through the rest of tonight and into our Memorial Day morning. Let me take you hour by hour here through the next couple of days, and you'll see how things are going to play out as we end the long holiday weekend and then head into the short work week. Partly cloudy skies as we go through the rest of tonight. So that's what you'll wake up to first thing tomorrow morning. This is 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have some clouds, but we're dry. Now tomorrow morning, a warm front is going to try to lift its way up to the northeast across the tri-state. Future Tracker continues to not do much with that front. One model tries to develop at least some spotty showers and thunder showers later morning into the early afternoon. So we can't rule out an isolated shower or thunder shower, mainly for the first half of the day, perhaps into the early afternoon hours. But then as the afternoon goes on, that front lifts farther to the northeast, and that'll be the better chance for some scattered showers and storms to develop to our north and then off to our northeast. So certainly through the afternoon, we'll see a mix of sun and clouds. We're going to get very warm. It's going to be humid and it's going to be breezy. But again, it will be mainly dry. So just that small chance a little earlier for a shower or a thunder shower to pop up. We're dry for our Monday night heading into our Tuesday. And Tuesday does look like a dry day with just a partly cloudy sky. It's going to be very warm, humid again, and we're going to be kind of pushing toward that 90-degree mark. I think we'll fall just shy. And then as we go through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, that's going to be our next decent chance for some showers and some thunderstorms. And you can see here on this latest trend of Future Tracker, by Wednesday morning, we have some showers developing from the west. And then look at our Wednesday. More showers and thunderstorms develop through the day. So Wednesday looks like it could turn out to be a fairly wet day and perhaps a little bit of a stormy one. So we'll keep an eye on that for you. But for the next couple of days, things are going to be a lot drier. So partly cloudy for the rest of tonight, 65 to 70 the low. Your Memorial Day, not too bad and feeling like summer. Sun and clouds, just an isolated thunder shower possible. Best chance would be through the morning, early afternoon. Otherwise, breezy, humid, very warm highs in the mid to upper 80s. Then we get close to 90 on Tuesday, but it'll be windy. That'll move some of that muggy air around. There's our next good chance for some showers and thunderstorms. So a weather aware day for us on Wednesday, and we'll have to keep an eye on the chance for any stronger storms again. A few showers and thunder showers will linger on Thursday too, and then behind that better rain chance Wednesday into Thursday, we will bring the temperature and the humidity down some on Friday. Not a big cool down, but highs will only be in the low 80s and the humidity will drop to that tolerable range for us, I think, for Friday. And then if we're lucky, stay there for Saturday and Sunday with those highs in the low to mid 80s. So that would feel pretty good. Right now, next Saturday looks dry, and then we pick up another decent chance for some showers and thunderstorms to develop on our Sunday. So could turn out to be kind of a 50-50 weekend. Today was certainly a busy one, and it got really wet for a lot of us for a while. Tomorrow, if you have some outdoor plans, you're in pretty good shape. Just that 20% chance for a shower or a thunder shower. And it's going to feel like summer. It's the unofficial start tomorrow, Memorial Day. It's going to feel like it.
It is. It's hot. Thanks, Stacey. Still ahead tonight on Eyewitness News, a 65-year-old man died after he was bitten by a shark in Hawaii. We'll have more details when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching Eyewitness News at 9.
Eyewitness News at 9 continues.
Newly released video shows a Los Angeles police officer and a man exchanging gunfire. The LAPD says the incident happened in South Los Angeles on April 20th. Officers say they were chasing a driver who got out of his car and ran after running a red light. A bystander, they say, came out of nowhere and shot an officer at point-blank range. That officer was hit in the leg and survived. That man is now charged with attempted murder of a police officer. He's being held on more than $2 million bail. At least one person is dead and 9 others injured after a shooting broke out at a neighborhood gathering in Virginia. Authorities were called to the scene late last night for reports of traffic congestion and people refusing to move their cars. While on their way there, dispatchers were notified about gunshots being fired in that same area. Police say the victims were taken to hospitals. No other information has been made available. 10 people were injured after police say they were hit by gunfire outside of a bar in New Jersey. Dan Cobb reports.
Romanero's Liquor and Bar was lit up overnight with bullets and shell casings. 10 people were shot in what police are calling a drive-by shooting that sent patrons and 2 suspects scrambling into the night.
We don't have an actual motive because, according to some witnesses, before firing out of the car kept laying on the horn, just kept beeping the horn because the traffic was backed up. So we're not saying that this is road rage, and we're not saying that this is a retaliation, because the truth of the matter is we just don't know at this point.
Trenton police believe over 30 shots were fired outside the bar. 8 people remain in the hospital Saturday, 2 in critical condition.
These are the things that we're not going to continue to tolerate in Trenton.
I'm feeling abandoned. Amen. I'm feeling that these children are abandoned. We know that you love us, God.
Community members like Pastor Lisa Austin Granville believe this shooting is symbolic of an area in central New Jersey in tatters.
We keep having these wonderful speeches, enticing words, but what's being really done?
Despite what Mayor Reed Gessiara describes as growth in Trenton, there remains a divide.
We're having economic progress, but at the same time, you're having a lot of youth lead to gang and gun violence.
Life doesn't mean anything. They'll shoot somebody for $5 around here.
A woman in a stolen RV led authorities on a wild chase in Los Angeles. Video shows that RV speeding away from police. The RV hit several cars and then hit a palm tree that tore off the passenger side door and heavily damaged the front end. At one point, a large dog in the driver's lap scrambled halfway out of the shattered windshield and jumped or tumbled onto the street, landing on the street from a vehicle that was moving there. Another dog was seen dangling from the window until that RV finally rear-ended another car and plowed right into some trees. You see it right there. The woman then got out and ran with the dog, but she was quickly tackled by authorities. A police dog in the Atlanta area died in the line of duty this week, and the 90-degree heat may be to blame. Canine Officer Eli served for 8 years. Eli and his handler were called to another police department to track a suspect on Thursday. Police say Eli was not actually chasing the suspect in real time, but was trying to find where he had last been.
At some point while they were walking back towards the patrol cars, the handler noticed that Eli was becoming stressed, and he fell down and he collapsed to the ground.
He was rushed to a medical facility. Doctors performed CPR for half an hour, but Eli did not survive. Investigators say it appears he suffered from a heat-related issue. Eli was a member of his handler's family. They lived and worked together for nearly a decade. A 65-year-old California tourist died after he was bitten by a shark while swimming off of the coast of Maui yesterday. Chelsea Davis tonight with the latest.
We're out in front of the Aston Ka'anapali Shores Resort, where a DLNR officer was out here all day warning people, making sure no one got into the water. There's also warning signs up all along the shoreline here at Ka'anapali Beach, half-mile in each direction. And all day today, 2 DLNR officers were out on the water, canvassing the area, making sure that shark was nowhere in sight. A bouquet of flowers sits next to a shark-sighted sign on Ka'anapali Beach, where a 65-year-old man was brought to shore after being bitten Saturday morning. Bystanders on the beach watched in horror.
It was really traumatic to see.
Authorities say the man was swimming about 60 yards from shore near the Ka'anapali Shores Resort. First responders went out with a jet ski and performed CPR, but couldn't revive him.
They pulled the man up. He looked unconscious when they transferred him to the other gurney, and we could see that they were trying to do CPR on him. But as we got closer, I saw some blood on his stomach, and then I got looking a little bit more, and his wrist, it looked like the skin on his wrist was just torn off. And then I got looking closer, and his entire left leg from his knee down was just missing. It looked like there was no blood or anything.
According to authorities, the 65-year-old is a California resident. Keller says he was vacationing on Maui with his wife.
As we were watching the man get pulled up, we could hear her screaming. She was saying, "That's my husband, that's my husband."
Shark experts say Hawaii comes in distant second for shark bites in the U.S. after Florida. They say Maui is the hot spot in the state for tiger shark bites. But without more information, it's tough to say what kind of shark was involved.
The bite radius and the tooth pattern, and sometimes a tooth fragment is left in the victim, like in the bone or something. And so a tooth fragment is the surest way, but also the bite radius, if it's a very big bite radius, then it rules out a lot of the other species of sharks, like Galapagos shark. Tiger shark, of course, is the number one that comes to my mind for a fatal attack.
Still ahead tonight on Eyewitness News at 9, a protest involving the KKK went on peacefully in Ohio. Find out how much the protest cost the city when we come back.
Evansville Regional Airport brings you Destination Weather.
We had some very active and busy weather earlier today in the Tri-State with lots of showers and thunderstorms moving through and quite a few severe thunderstorm warnings. And we did have some wind damage in a few parts of the Tri-State. All of that is over for us. Those showers and thunderstorms and that severe weather threat has ended. And you can see the rain is pushing off kind of to the mid-Atlantic states. They're still dealing with a lot of severe weather, though, back here in the plains, where really they have been dealing with it all week long. Let's go in a little bit tighter here and look at Storm Tracker, showing that rain and those storms coming to an end. And now for the rest of tonight, we just have some partly cloudy skies. So if you're flying out of Evansville Regional Airport tomorrow on Memorial Day, really you've got green plains in all directions. If you're going north to Chicago and Detroit, it'll be a little bit cooler up there. Look at that high in Chicago tomorrow, just 66, 70 in Detroit. Dallas, though, will be in the mid-80s, and it'll be hot again to the southeast. Charlotte around 90, 93 for a high in Atlanta. And if you're heading down to Florida, Orlando gets a high of 94 tomorrow. We're going to be a little above normal, but I think we're still going to avoid 90 for a high tomorrow and be in the upper 80s to around 90 degrees in a few spots. It'll be very warm, it'll be breezy, and it'll be humid for your Memorial Day. But unlike today, much drier. Just a few isolated showers or thunder showers possible through the morning and into the early afternoon. But once again, in a couple more days, we have a much better chance again for some showers and thunderstorms. And I'll update you on the timing of that as we head through our short work week this week, coming up at 10 o'clock over on WEHT Local.
We'll see you then. Thanks, Stacy. In Dayton, Ohio yesterday, 9 members of a group connected to the KKK showed up to rally in front of the courthouse, but hundreds more were there to counter-protest. Members of the Indiana-based group known as the Honorable Sacred Knights got a permit to hold their rally there months ago. So city officials and community leaders organized rallies of their own, and they held events all over the city. More than 500 of them rallied in the courthouse square to make sure that everyone was safe. The city spent $650,000 on everything from blocking off the streets to bringing in extra officers. There were no problems during those protests. The 2019 graduating class from West Point is the most diverse in the military academy's history. 34 African-American women graduated together yesterday. West Point officials say this year's class also has the highest number of female Hispanic graduates. Vice President Mike Pence spoke at that graduation ceremony. Still ahead tonight on Eyewitness News, the number of measles cases continues to grow, and now a baby in Seattle has been diagnosed. We'll have the details when we come back.
Just for a better shot. Can I hang up and call you back in a minute?
We are following breaking news right now in Evansville, where police are on the scene of a shooting. This is a live picture right now from Evansville. Evansville police say that one man was shot outside of this home in the 600 block of Cross Street just after 8:30 tonight. Police say the victim then ran inside of a nearby apartment. He was taken to the hospital and is heading into surgery. Witnesses told police that between 4 and 6 shots were fired. There is no information on a suspect at this time, but as you can see, there's a heavy police presence there right now. We are still working on getting more information for you. We, of course, will have more in this show if we get it, or tonight on Eyewitness News at 10 on WEHT Local. Health officials have confirmed that a child has been diagnosed with the measles. It is now the second case in Massachusetts this year. That child went to a number of busy locations. Officials say that includes the YMCA and a child care facility. The state's Department of Public Health alerted residents about that exposure by email. A baby in Seattle has also now been diagnosed with the measles. Tammy Mutasa has the story.
As the number of measles cases grows, so does the concern from parents with babies, like Matt Sayer. Children are given the first dose of the vaccine at 12 to 15 months old.
I'm concerned about our 8-month-old baby who hasn't had his measles shot yet.
King County Health Department officials say a 6-month-old girl was taken to Seattle Children's while she was contagious with the measles virus. Officials say the baby was exposed from another person diagnosed with measles in their house. Officials say the child was in the ER from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Friday. Anyone in the ER at that time could have been exposed, since the measles virus can stay in the air for up to 2 hours.
If it's increasing in King County, then that concerns us, and try and stay away from areas where measles has been reported.
Seattle Children's sent us a statement saying our emergency department staff immediately implemented appropriate infection control procedures, which include isolating the affected patient and other patients and families in the emergency department. All patients and families in the emergency department were made aware and screened to determine whether measles exposure treatment was appropriate. Officials say most people are protected by vaccination.
If she wasn't vaccinated, yeah, we'd probably, me and my wife, be seriously discussing about her getting vaccinated right now, and probably would.
Still ahead tonight on Eyewitness News, see how this year's Indy 500 will go down in history when we come back.
Randall, mic check. Can it get any better for Simon Pagenaud? We hard to top his month of May.
Eyewitness News at 9 continues.
Another racehorse was euthanized after being injured at a horse park in California. The park says the horse injured a leg during his 6th race yesterday and was euthanized today. He is the 26th horse to be euthanized at the park since December. It's inspired some controversy and criticism from advocates for animals, and it sparked a re-examination of the sport in that state. Well, weather was on everyone's mind today at the 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. It will go into the history books as a dry race, but a hot and muggy one.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Monday brought a final call for these IMS campers.
That's the last of them.
With the light of a torch.
See, even in the wind, you can light your cigar with this. Just don't burn your canopy down.
One of the last infield camping crews put a bow on the 101st running of the Indy 500.
It's kind of like we're at a funeral right now, you know, because it was so much fun, you know, doing all this stuff.
The fans may be trickling out, but the work to clean up after them is underway. 23 groups took to the grounds at 7 Monday morning.
We have a challenge to be done by 2:30, but I would be very shocked if we get that. Can you get this started?
Terry Downey and her youth church group from Anderson have cleaned IMS for a decade.
It's pretty messy. It's pretty gross work. I think I have beer all over my body now from today's efforts alone.
These cleaning crews are all unpaid volunteers, but there's an incentive for cleaning up all this trash. The more of these they pick up and put in the bags, the more cash they can get, because all this aluminum gets weighed, giving organizations about $10 a bag.
Several of our kids are going to get to go on mission trips this year that otherwise they might not be able to afford.
An unknowing donation is just another perk, these campers say, as all part of the experience.
Kind of sad to have the last cigar, huh?
It might be the last for this year, but these fans are ready to light to the 102nd running. Would you do it again?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we've already planned.
Bringing my rubber boots next time, though.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I forgot. I mean, I was born and raised in Indiana, but I forgot when the rain comes down, it comes down, it doesn't stop.
And the winner sees the lead after a huge crash with 20 laps to go. And speaking of the Indy 500, Randall's here. We're heading back to the track.
Yeah, with Simon Pagenaud, he was the winner today, and it was an unbelievable finish. We'll see how he did it and go one-on-one with the champ. That's coming up next in sports.
And now, your sports authority with Randall Parmley.
Can it get any better for Simon Pagenaud? It will be hard to top his month of May. He won the Indianapolis Grand Prix 2 weeks ago, posted the top qualifying speed for the 500, earning the pole, and now He wins the race. Talk about an unbelievable sweep. Pagenaud was, of course, attempting to become the first Frenchman to win the 500 since Rene Thomas in 1914. And what a finish we had. Pagenaud outdueled Alexander Rossi in a 13-lap sprint to the finish. The two swapped the lead 5 times over the final stretch of the race, and Pagenaud took the lead for good with under 2 laps to go, winning his first Indianapolis 500. Pagenaud dominated today, leading a race-high 116 laps, and he got that milk bath. Anthony Calhoun goes one-on-one with the winner.
All over his face.
So here we are with the 103rd running of the Indy 500 winner right here, Simon Pagenaud. Congratulations, man. I know you're a fan favorite. What does it feel like to have this right here and to win the greatest spectacle in racing?
It feels unreal. It feels like I'm dreaming. I'm still sleeping, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow. It won't be like that. So I hope I never wake up, and I hope this day never ends. I really want to thank the fans. You know, it's like you said, I feel like a fan favorite, and I'm not even from here. So, you know, I've always felt so welcome in the U.S., and you guys are amazing, American people, for, you know, supporting me like that. I just want to thank you guys. Thank you.
Well, you know, it was amazing to see the type of month that you've had. I mean, you check mark on everything. I mean, you win the IndyCar Grand Prix, get on the pole, and now you win the race. I mean, an unbelievable month of May for you.
Yes, it's you know, it's funny. There's that tick of mystery in racing, and it's what I call aligning the stars, or the stars aligning. And I really feel like this month for me, it's been amazingly aligning. Like it's like I can't do anything wrong. I'm sure it will happen again, but it's like we can only do everything right with my team. But you know, let's not just give me all the credit, because my team, my crew, number 22 crew, Menards and Chevy, they did everything they could to give me the power to get me here, and the crew was amazing in pit lane all day. Strategy was fantastic, and you know, I'm just at the end of the whole thing, but it's cool to be able to execute.
You know, it was amazing seeing you at the end of the race in Victory Circle, and you literally took that milk and just dropped it all over you. What was that moment like? What was that scene like?
It's the sweetest moment in racing. It's it was a dream to do that, you know, and I always celebrate. I do the shower with the champagne, and my dream was to do the same with the milk, and being able to do that is very special, because there's only one race you drink the milk. And there's only so many winners in this world, so I'm just glad to be one of them.
Congratulations, my man. So happy for you.
Thank you.
There you have it there,
Thank
the
you.
Indy 500 winner, Simon Pagenaud, everybody.
Thanks so much, AC, and don't forget to check out the Big Race Indy page at TriStateHomepage.com for all things Indianapolis 500 that we covered this week, every store that we have been able to do. We've got it right there, a lot of exclusive online content that you're only going to find on the Indy page at TriStateHomepage.com. So if you're sitting at home tonight and you're wanting to relive the race and check out some stuff that you've not seen yet, make sure you jump online and check it out. All right, time for a break. More on the way. The Blues are heading to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1970. We're going to hear from Jaden Swartz and General Manager Doug Armstrong when Sports continues.
Now, your sports authority with Randall Parmley.
Well, it's a big day tomorrow for high school baseball in Indiana. Sectional semifinals are tomorrow afternoon, and then the finals are tomorrow night. Here's a look at tomorrow's schedule. Let's start in Class 4A. The sectional championship game is tomorrow at 11 at Bosse Field. Wrights and Jasper, or I should say Wrights and Castle, will play for the title. Class 3A at Braun Stadium, it is Mount Vernon in one semifinal at 10, and Heritage Hills and Boonville go at 12:30. The championship game is tomorrow night. Class 3 at Vincennes Lincoln, Pike Central and Vincennes Lincoln play at 11 local time, followed by Princeton, Washington, and that championship game is tomorrow night as well. Class 2 at South Spencer, North Posey and Perry Central play for the title at 6. Class 2A at Mitchell, Southridge and North Knox get the day started at 10, followed by Linton, Stockton, and South Knox, the championship game tomorrow night. And Class A at Tecumseh, the Braves will play Northeast DuBois at 10. If Tecumseh wins, they advance to the finals tomorrow night. All right, in the big leagues, the Reds and Cubs from Wrigley Field. Second inning, Gino Suarez here at the plate. He singles in to right. Nick Senzel would come in to score, and the Reds have a 1-0 lead. Third inning now, here's Wilson Contreras at the plate for Chicago. He singles to center. Nick Senzel charges, comes up firing, and throws out Anthony Rizzo at the plate. The Reds up 3-0 still. Bottom of the eighth, Reds now up 8-1. Javi Baez cuts into that lead with a solo home run. But the Reds get the win this afternoon at Wrigley. They take 2 out of 3 from the Cubs, 10-2 is the final. The Stanley Cup Finals begin tomorrow night, and for the first time in 49 years, the Blues will be playing for the Cup. It's been quite the season for St. Louis. They were the worst team in the league on January 3rd, but then something happened. The team got red hot. St. Louis rolled off an 11-game winning streak in February and then just continued to move up in the standings. The Blues will now face the Bruins for the Cup in a rematch of the 1970 Finals.
You know, we knew we had a good team earlier in the year. We just went through some struggles. It took a little bit for the chemistry to really kick in, and but then once we did, you know, earlier in the year we still beat really good teams. We just couldn't find the winning streaks we needed to.
We're excited to be here in the championship finals. You know, getting here is part of the process, but not the end goal. There's another chapter to be written for one of these two organizations, and as I said, the manager comes out in you pretty quickly after the third round. You want to tap the brakes and understand that we want to try and win a championship, and there's a lot of work left ahead of us.
Game 1 is tomorrow night in Boston. Well, some sad news to pass along tonight. NFL Hall of Fame quarterback Bart Starr has passed away. The legendary QB helped build the Packers dynasty in the 1960s and won the MVP of the first 2 Super Bowls. Starr passed away today in Birmingham, Alabama. He was 85 years old. I had a chance to interview him in Evansville several years ago, and an absolutely fantastic gentleman. He was unbelievably friendly. Let's go back to you guys at the desk.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Randall. Stacey's back now, and how's it looking for tomorrow?
Much better than today. We got past our wettest part of our Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow going to feel like summer. We're going to be in the upper 80s for highs. It'll be breezy and it'll be humid, but nothing more than an isolated thunder shower tomorrow morning, early afternoon. Otherwise, a mix of sun and clouds for your Memorial Day, so looking good for anything you got to do outside.
Sounds good. Thanks for watching. We'll see you at 10 o'clock on WEHT Local. Have a great night.
The most watched, the most trusted. Eyewitness News, everywhere you are. Now, from Eyewitness News, your weather authority. Forecast first.
Well, a lot of showers and thunderstorms for us earlier today, but the rain and the severe threat is over for us. We are going to stay dry overnight. For your Memorial Day, a much quieter, much drier day tomorrow. We'll see a mix of sun and clouds and just a few isolated thunder showers possible. Otherwise, very warm, breezy, and humid tomorrow, about 70 first thing in the morning, low 80s by lunchtime, and then highs are going to go into the upper 80s for your Monday afternoon. I'll have a look ahead to when our rain chances go up again, though, as we head into our short work week. That's in your forecast next here on Eyewitness News at 10.
Live from WEHT Local, this is Eyewitness News at 10 in high definition.
Right now at 10, damage in Davis County tonight. Strong storms blow through the tri-state, ripping off roofs and pulling trees out of the ground. Good evening at 10 o'clock. I'm Brandon Bartlett. We begin tonight, though, with breaking news in Evansville, where police are right now on the scene of a shooting. This is a live picture we're going to take you to right now of the scene. Police are on that scene in Evansville. They tell us that one man was shot outside of that home in the 600 block of Cross Street just after 8:30 tonight. Police say the victim then ran inside of a nearby apartment. He was then taken to the hospital and is heading into surgery tonight. And EPD just tweeted the man has life-threatening injuries. Witnesses told police that between 4 and 6 shots were fired. There is no information about a suspect at this time. We are working to get more information for you, and of course we'll have that on air and online as we get it. Well, now to our weather. Meteorologist Stacey May is here now. You've been tracking those storms that moved through the tri-state, and they caused some damage.
They did. They caused us some trouble, especially in Davis County. So let's take a look back at Storm Tracker. You can see how all of this got going very late this morning and then around midday. And those showers and storms just kind of fired up right across the tri-state. A lot of us saw heavy rain and quite a bit of cloud to ground lightning. But in a few spots, we saw those storms turn strong to severe. And they did produce some wind damage. And that is what happened for us just to the southwest of Owensboro, especially around the St. Joseph area. You're going to see some more video of that here in just a moment. We're not sure if that was any kind of rotation or if it was just some straight line winds. The Weather Service could go out and kind of assess that damage over the next couple of days. However, this is all gone, so our severe threat now, Brandon, is over.
That is good to hear. Yeah. Thank you, Stacey. And in Davis County tonight, as Stacey said, that severe weather earlier today did cause some significant damage there. Strong winds ripped off the roof of a garage in the area of State Highway 500. The family told Eyewitness News tonight they were in the pool when those storms blew in and could barely see through the rain to get back into the house. In addition to the damage to their garage, a trailer was thrown several feet, and their RV also had some minor damage.
We've seen a bunch of hot winds through here before. You know, it's ripped up the play set, through the trampoline across. But honestly, this was the first time that I literally couldn't see anything other than just destruction.
And down the road, a 100-year-old tree was also uprooted and thrown into the road. The fire department moved that tree, and traffic there is once again moving tonight. Those storms that moved through the tri-state this afternoon also caused a house fire earlier today in Henderson. It happened in the 2000 block of Peggy Drive. Officials on scene tell us that fire was weather-related, but didn't say if lightning struck the home. Several units with the Henderson Fire Department responded. No one was at home at the time, but 2 dogs were inside of that house. We're told they are safe tonight. An Eyewitness News follow-up to a story that we told you about last night. The Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office conducted a sobriety checkpoint last night. We now know that checkpoint was near the intersection of Northwest 2nd Street and South 3rd Avenue. A total of 78 vehicles went through that checkpoint. 2 drivers, we're told, were arrested for driving while intoxicated. That checkpoint ran from 10 o'clock last night until 2 o'clock this morning. Henderson Church is now officially recognized as a historical landmark in the state of Kentucky. Eyewitness News' Amelia Young was at the dedication ceremony that the church held earlier today.
We've known internally that we're a part of history, but now the world will know.
It sits on the corner of Washington and Elm, a church with history dating back to 1840.
Many good times, many sad times that have gone on. But through it all, God has been a blessing to each of us.
It's a place where people have celebrated cried, laughed, and cheered.
We've endured through lots, being established in 1840, during times of slavery when it was against the law, really, to gather together for African Americans and blacks to gather together and worship.
The African Baptist Church was formed in 1840. In 1866, moved into the location it's in today and changed the name to First Missionary Baptist Church.
It's been a blessing that we've been able to stay and endure and still give God the honor and praise for 179 years.
The congregation already knew they were a part of history, but now it's officially a historical landmark as the church was awarded a marker from Kentucky's Historical Society.
Everyone who will ever come here will always know what place we have in not only in African American history, not only in Kentucky history, but in the history of the United States.
Unveiling the marker was a proud moment for not only the congregation, but the city as well.
We're very proud of that fact, and we want to echo the fact that God has been good to us down through the years.
It's a great feeling. It's a blessing from God.
In Henderson, Amelia Young, Eyewitness News.
Several local cemeteries are holding Memorial Day services tomorrow to remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Services include Locust Hill Cemetery at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Oak Hill Cemetery at 11 a.m., St. Joseph's Cemetery at 10 a.m., and Lyles Cemetery also at 10 a.m. Now, for a full list of those services, you can go to our website, tristatehomepage.com.